Valor honored. The nation pays tribute to the men and women who have served their country. Critical exercise. Intense training to protect America's diplomats from terror attacks. Clean bill of health. A New York doctor quarantined with Ebola is now free of the disease.
And I'm Wyatt Goolsby in Baltimore at the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference, where it's the first time American church leaders are meeting since the Synod on the Family.
Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Veterans Day, Tuesday, November 11th, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Originally, it marked the World War I armistice. Now we observe this day as Veterans Day. A grateful nation honors all who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie reports.
Taps, a moment of silence, followed by a single bell, was observed at the New York Stock Exchange. Single roses were carefully placed in the names of victims at the 9/11 memorial. This year's events had special meaning. 2014 marks the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I. Vice President Joe Biden led the wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington Cemetery at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. He was accompanied by the new chief of the Veterans Affairs Department, Robert McDonald. McDonald has investigations into the alleged massive cover-up related to fraudulent medical records and delayed care to thousands of veterans. Yesterday, he said he wants to change how the VA is viewed.
We want them to think of our department as embracing them, as giving them a warm hug, a place they can go to get the care they need.
It was a time to heal, honor, and reflect at the Veterans Observance at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel helped commemorate the 30th anniversary of the three servicemen statue.
To all the veterans here today, thank you. To your families, thank you.
As they reminisced, many here also discussed the issues at the VA, where some get treatment for physical injuries, while others suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder.
There's no excuse for turning veterans away or making them wait for extreme periods of time to get to see a doctor.
Johnny Herman says the VA has always been there for him.
It's a great organization. It always has been.
The VA has over 300,000 employees who serve over 9 million veterans, making it America's largest healthcare system. The new VA secretary says he will focus on making veterans feel like they are more important than the bureaucracy. In Washington, Susanne LaFrankie, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Suzanne. And the UK and other parts of Europe still celebrate this day as Armistice Day. Outside the Tower of London, ceramic red poppies represent the nearly 900,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers lost during World War II. The poppy symbolizes the fallen in the UK and former colonies since the Great War, taken from the poem about Flanders Field. The armistice ending the First World War took effect on November 11th, 1918. Now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. American Catholic bishops are sending a message of unity in the church and with Pope Francis. The head of the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference says the Holy Father is setting the tone for the USCCB's Fall General Assembly. Wyatt Goolsby is covering the meetings from Baltimore tonight. Wyatt?
Yes, Brian, bishops here say the themes of Pope Francis' pontificate are guiding their prayers and their plannings for this week's conference. Despite reports that there's conflict between clergy members and the Holy Father, the president of the conference neither signaled conflict nor division. His comments come as nearly 300 bishops from across the country are holding their week-long fall assembly. Today we heard about areas of sub-Saharan Africa where catechumens outnumber Catholics and about how the church can better evangelize Americans who have fallen away from attending Mass. Archbishop Joseph Kirks, who leads the meetings, tells me throughout the conference the theme of human dignity has ran through all their sessions. He even opened up to me this morning about how he personally identifies with Pope Francis' ability to reach out to all people, including the poor and marginalized.
Because I grew up with my brother George, who had Down syndrome, that that brought out maybe qualities that God had given me. I mean, they're all gifts from God, but sometimes another person can bring out these qualities. They have challenges, I don't want to minimize that, but there's such a joy, and I think that does come through with Pope Francis's significant message of the joy of the gospel that we hear so much about.
He also says the bishops have been writing out examples of Pope Francis that they can use to talk about the Catholic Church's position on the dignity of the human person. Kurt says the way the Holy Father treats the sick and the poor is one of those. Today, bishops here at the conference also talked about one of the biggest challenges to the church here in the U.S. being the way to communicate Pope Francis' message in words to the best of everyone. Coming up just a little bit later in the newscast, we'll hear from Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who I talked to earlier. He talked to me about his attending the recent Synod on the Family in Rome and clarifies a little bit of the misunderstandings about its message. Brian?
All right, thank you, Wyatt. We'll look forward to that conversation with Cardinal Dolan. And Pope Francis takes steps to speed up rulings on appeals by priests who face serious charges such as sexually abusing minors. The Holy Father has created a panel to study appeals that make it to the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. Critics say the Vatican moves too slowly on deciding the fate of these priests. The 7 cardinals or bishops on the panel are appointed by the Pope. Bishops accused of abuse will still have their appeals handled by all congregation members, not just by this new panel. Some abuse survivors want church hierarchy who covered up abuse to be punished. We also need to correct a story we reported last week. The Associated Press mistakenly reported that a priest convicted of being a pedophile was excommunicated. AP has since corrected that report. We apologize for the error. The man, Jose Marceau of Argentina, was stripped of his priestly status or his priestly faculties. He was not excommunicated. A New York doctor treated for Ebola is now back at home, disease-free. So tonight, there are no more Ebola patients under treatment here in the U.S. Jason Calvi has more.
Today I am healthy and no longer infectious.
33-year-old Dr. Craig Spencer has won the battle of a lifetime. He was diagnosed with Ebola on October 23rd. Today, he leaves New York City's Bellevue Hospital virus-free. And now, after almost 3 weeks of isolation, he's free to embrace his medical team and the mayor.
It is a good feeling to hug a hero. And we have a hero here in our midst, someone who served others no matter how much danger.
Dr. Spencer volunteered with Doctors Without Borders, serving Ebola patients in Guinea for 5 weeks.
I cried as I held children who were not strong enough to survive the virus. But I also experienced immense joy when patients I treated were cured.
The World Health Organization roughly estimates Ebola has killed nearly 5,000 people this year. More than 13,000 have been infected. Most cases come from Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia.
Please join me in turning our attention back to West Africa and ensuring that medical volunteers and other aid workers do not face stigma and threats upon their return home.
Some 300 people are still being monitored for the disease in the United States with twice daily temperature checks. That includes Dr. Spencer's fiance. Well, she has at least 3 more days of testing. And Casey Hickox, the nurse who fought quarantines in New Jersey and Maine, she ended her daily monitoring yesterday. Brian?
All right, thank you, Jason Calvi. Dr. Carolyn Woo, President and CEO of Catholic Relief Services, joining us from Baltimore. She's just briefed U.S. bishops about the humanitarian work that CRS does. And Dr. Woo, you sent a letter to Congress arguing against banning travel between the Ebola-infected countries or affected countries in West Africa and the U.S. Why?
3 reasons. The first is that you want volunteers from around the world to go to West Africa. So if there's a ban, they are not likely to go. And we desperately need people. The second thing is that we need to have continuous activities, particularly economic activities, from West Africa. Otherwise, we'll have another round of problems. The third reason is that while we need to be very cautious and follow the protocol, we also need to have the confidence that life can continue, that there is a way to return life to normal.
And we can't be caught up in fear. I know that the Catholic Church needs to be present to minister to those who are suffering. What is it that CRS has been able to do there to fight the Ebola outbreak?
Yes, so CRS is expanding our work in Liberia and particularly with the Catholic Church there. There are 5 things we're doing. So the first is that we're assisting the Catholic Church in providing beds and also opening and staffing community care centers so that people will go there for their checkup. The second is that we still need to have broader education, whether it is through radio, posters, house to house, so that we could educate people about what they need to do and how they could prevent contracting the disease. The third thing is that we also need to provide equipment, all the supplies that you see, we still do that. The fourth is that we need to do contact tracing. And again, this is to prevent it from going too far. And the last thing is that we need to look forward to the other problems, such as starvation. We need people to be harvesting, otherwise they won't get food and they won't get seeds for the next year. We also need to deal with vulnerable children and orphans because now they have lost family members and there's a stigma. So our work is quite holistic and it's with the Catholic Church.
And of course, in your address to the bishops, you pointed out the importance of collaboration, talking about how the church can't be a tiny dot operating on its own. Explain that a little bit further.
Yes. So what I mean is that the church has sprouted services over thousands of years. We have a natural instinct of how we create organizations to serve, and many of our organizations prosper. But we don't have the same instinct for collaboration. So each individual service organization, a health organization, a schools, whatever, stand and fall on its own as if we cannot leverage support from other parts of the church. So here is the era now where we as a Catholic Church need to know how to leverage each other, support each other, draw from each other's strengths so that each one does not stand and fall like a dot on its own. We need to be connected. And it's the idea of one body, one church, and that we need to have connective tissues and that we also can draw from each other for the vitality of the church in action as one.
Dr. Carolyn Woo, President of Catholic Relief Services, joining us from Baltimore tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
And President Obama opens 2 days of talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. The president underlined his desire for the U.S. and China to take their relationship to a new level. He said it would benefit the whole world. President Xi also signaled he wants to grow that relationship between the two nations. The Chinese president then hosted the U.S. president, the Secretary of State, and ambassador for a private dinner. More in-depth talks between the two world leaders continue tomorrow. Victims' family members are not satisfied with the conviction of a South Korean ferry captain following the deaths of more than 300 passengers. The captain, who was found not guilty of murder, was sentenced to 36 years in prison for negligence and abandoning his passengers. Most of the dead were high school students. The verdict prompted rage and grief from parents in the court. They say the sentence is too lenient. They wanted the death penalty. More than 6 months out from that tragedy, the nation is still grieving one of the worst disasters in South Korean history. 8 women are dead and 20 others are fighting for life after undergoing sterilization surgeries in free government-run programs in India. 83 young women had the surgeries within only 6 hours. The poor villagers were paid $10. Activists blame quotas for healthcare workers pressuring patients into surgery. They say women are the victims of a target-based approach to population control in India. At about 37%, India has the world's highest rate of sterilization among women. Coming up, our Wyatt Goolsby goes one-on-one with New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan as U.S. bishops continue meeting in Baltimore. And a taste of the cooking a Vatican Swiss Guard is helping others enjoy with his new cookbook.
I just want to say thanks to all the veterans for what you've done. Keep us safe and keep us free.
Thank you so much for all you've done for our country, and thank you to the families who have also sacrificed.
Americans expressing their gratitude for our veterans here in Washington today. Thank you for joining us this Veterans Day. I'm Brian Patrick. As we honor and thank our military veterans, today also marks the Feast of St. Martin of Tours. It's a fitting feast day since he is the patron of soldiers. A 4th century Roman soldier, he was the son of a veteran. Forced to join the army at age 15, Martin would later go on to be the Bishop of Tours in France. Father Michael Kelly, pastor of St. Martin of Tours Parish in Washington, says the saint remains relatable today.
Well, I think some veterans, especially probably, Catholic veterans, would be impressed to realize, Martin was someone like us. He knew what it meant to be a soldier, or the challenges and struggles of that. And he also knew what it was like to often not have what you needed, which is what happens today with a lot of the veterans.
Tradition tells us Martin cut his soldier's cloak with his sword and gave half of the cloak to a freezing beggar. He later saw Jesus in a dream wearing his cloak and was inspired to be baptized. Well, it's been a busy second day of the U.S. Bishops' meeting in Baltimore. We're grateful to New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan for taking time to visit with our Wyatt Goolsby earlier today. Wyatt?
Thanks very much, Brian. Yes, we're in Baltimore, Maryland, just outside of the Marriott here on Waterfront. Of course, as you've been mentioning, the bishops are meeting, and we're here with Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archdiocese of New York. Cardinal Dolan.
Nice to be with you, Wyatt. Thanks for the invite.
Sure. Thanks very much. And tell me about one of the things you guys have been talking about is the recent Synod on the Family that you attended in Rome. Tell me about how that sort of translates, because you've been saying how this is sort of a year-long dialogue. What does that mean?
Well, if you think about it, the church has been in dialogue about marriage and family for about 2,000 years. We're always trying to better realize the beauty, the majesty of God's teaching about marriage and family. And what Pope Francis has wisely asked us to do is concentrate on that. Now, he asked us to do that a year ago. So what we almost got is a 2-year concentration on the splendid topic of marriage and family. We did that leading up to the Synod last October, and now what the Pope has said, he hasn't made any suggestions about how we might want that conversation to continue. He has said, here's the relatio that was approved at the end of the Synod. There was a good consensus there. This is going to be the working document for the Synod in October of 2015. You bishops, however you want to pray over this, however you want to talk about this, you want to go to your pastoral council, you want to bring it to your people, you want to go to your priest council, you want to ask your offices of marriage and family within your dioceses to quarterback it for you. Try to get some more feedback and come ready for the Synod in October. I would predict, Wyatt, that we'll probably spend a big chunk of time at our June meeting as bishops in talking about the Synod and in preparing the delegates whom we suggest to the Pope to be appointed, in preparing them and letting them listen to us so they know what sentiments to bring to the Synod.
Obviously, there are a number of bishops here who didn't get to attend that Synod like you
Most
did.
of them, yeah. Yes. About 99% of them.
What are the questions they are asking you about it? What are those conversations
In fact, did
like?
you see Bishop Conlon stood up yesterday at the General Session, and he said, hey, our people at home think all of us were there at the Synod. They don't know that just the 4 of you were there. This isn't an ecumenical council, it's a Synod. They're asking a lot about it because once again, what do we got? We got a big discrepancy over what really went on and what was reported. I mean, the reporting on the Synod would lead you to believe that it was a very raucous, fractured assembly, that we concentrated on hot-button issues like divorce and remarriage, same-sex couples, cohabitation. That wasn't true. We concentrated on God's revelation about marriage and how we can strengthen that and present that more cleanly and cogently to the world around us. That's what we talked about, and the bishops appreciate that clarification to hear what really went on in comparison to what's captured the sound bites and headlines.
Yes, and we really appreciate your explaining that because I know that's caused so many questions.
I hope so. I hope it was helpful.
Thanks, Cardinal
My
Dolan.
honor. Thank you, Wyatt. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. We'll toss it back to you now, Brian, in Washington.
Thank you, Wyatt and Cardinal Dolan. Up next, the U.S. steps up its training to keep our diplomats safe.
I think of Veterans Day, I think of my father, who was a veteran of World War II and was in the invasion of Normandy.
We're very grateful for all the work they do to keep us safe.
Thank you for your sacrifice.
Sincere gratitude for our veterans from folks here in D.C. on this Veterans Day. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. I want to thank our veterans as well. With growing security threats overseas, the State Department is beefing up security training to prevent the next Benghazi. Catherine Zeltner reports on real-life exercises in a not-so-real city.
It is a nightmare scenario. An assault on a U.S. diplomatic compound. Attackers coming in waves. and security agents trying to keep them out. This is an exercise, but it was very real in Benghazi 2 years ago, when Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans were killed.
And that was a hard lesson, obviously. Those are hard lessons that we've learned.
Now those lessons are being taught on a military base in Virginia. It looks like a city, and its location is classified. Agents learn the security techniques here before going overseas.
Post-Benghazi, there was a recognition within the department and the government that it was important to focus particular attention on some of the highest threat posts around the world.
Security agents now also train with Marines, who have a rapid response force to bolster diplomatic posts and their agents under threat. The agents train for real-life situations.
Welcome to my mosque.
Like escorting a diplomat to meet the local mullah, to dealing with a convoy coming under attack, and moving the diplomat out of harm's way while waiting for backup.
And it's always a fluid and dynamic environment, so it's important to be able to adjust to that.
Exercises that hopefully help if the threat ever becomes real. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine, and we pray that threat doesn't. It's been less than a month since the Vatican Synod on the Family opened some challenging dialogue. Today, U.S. bishops meeting here in Baltimore say faithful Catholics need to reach out to marginalized groups.
We have to, help people to realize that that they should not demonize the undocumented, and nobody should be demonized or because of their apparent sexual orientations.
And we're joined tonight by Father Paul Chek, Executive Director of Courage International. That's a group endorsed by the Vatican helping Catholics with same-sex attraction live lives of chastity. The Synod brought out the issue of ministry to gay people. Is the Catholic Church doing a good enough job, and what can be improved?
Well, we can always do better, Brian. It's true. Our best pastoral model is always going to be Christ. And let's use the example from John chapter 8, the woman caught in unchastity. And I think 3 things we can take from that episode of the gospel. The first is our Lord knows there's a particular weakness that we have when it comes to the desire for love and affection. And that desire can be misdirected. And so he expresses his compassion for her. But secondly, he calls her to conversion of heart, and there's the redemption that is offered to her as to anyone else. And the third part that I think we can look to in a model there is it's a very personal encounter. So in all of the church's approach to the question of homosexuality, we have all 3 of those. There's the recognition of a weakness, there is the call to conversion of heart, and it's done in a very personal way.
There are groups that try to rehabilitate people with same-sex attraction. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the question is, what does it mean to rehabilitate? We're all in need of redemption.
Indeed.
And there are wounds that we all suffer that need to be healed in different ways. So without wanting to generalize, I think we want to take care to ensure that we don't lose an individual person as we try to reach out to them with Christ's compassion and truth.
What kind of reaction do you get to Courage? Is there any backlash you deal with?
There is, I think, because there's confusion that the church is not hospitable to men and women with same-sex attraction, but that's not the case. Our Lord reached out to everyone with an understanding of the human heart and a desire to draw them closer to himself and to the truth and to charity. But the church preserves a 3-fold distinction, very important for us. Person, always good. The inclination is something that is not consistent with our nature, and it's the action that is considered to be grave matter. So we need to preserve that distinction.
All right. Very important. Thank you for pointing that out. Father Paul Chek, and the group is called Courage.
Yes.
We appreciate you being with us
Thank
tonight.
you, Brian. God bless you.
And thanks for your blessing, Father. Well, when not protecting Pope Francis, one Swiss Guard is cultivating his talents in the kitchen. 24-year-old David Geiser has been serving on the Swiss Guard for almost a year now. Once a week, when the nuns who cook for the Guard take a day off, he helps out in the kitchen. He really enjoys whipping up a tasty meal for his fellow guards. He admits being a soldier and a cook seems like an unusual pairing, but it works out.
I worked for a famous chef in Switzerland and only then signed up for the Swiss Guard. I am now working in my job as a Swiss Guard. On the side, I've written this cookbook. That, of course, is a little peculiar.
An English translation of David's cookbook is in the works. It features some favorite recipes of Pope Francis, Pope Emeritus Benedict, and St. John Paul II. Well, until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you, veterans, for serving your nation. We salute you today. Good night and God bless you.